Good afternoon and welcome to today's March webinar. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes here, so hang tight. Thank you. Once again, if you're just joining us, welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We're going to get started in just about another minute here. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Murphy, and I'm ACT's Director of Programs and Events. I want to thank you for joining us today for ACT's March webinar entitled Blockchain and Transportation, Protection, Privacy, and Payments. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I will do my best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. Second, we have a Q&A at the end of this webinar. But during the actual webinar, please feel free to type in your questions as we go in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please note, when asking the question, please also try to identify who the question is for when typing it in. Finally, this session is being recorded. I will have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends for all of our members. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT is currently working on. David?
Thank you, Casey. Good afternoon. This is our second webinar in less than a week, so I appreciate everyone who's made the time to join us for another great topic. We are in an exciting period of innovation within the transportation sector. Some of this we see and interact with on a daily basis, like micro-mobility, mobile payment system, and bus tracking. But behind these services, there's a complex system of technology and data being put to work to increase their efficiency and improve the user experience. This technology presents great opportunity for us as TDM professionals to enable more people to get to work and other destinations without driving alone. As the premier association for TDM professionals, our goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. ACT is your organization for the latest information and best practices in TDM. If you are not yet a member, I invite you to join your colleagues and become part of our community. ACT membership is a great investment in your professional development and career growth. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to update everyone on some of the happenings at ACT. As many of you have seen, we had to postpone our Emerging Mobility Summit that was to be held at the end of April. In its place, we'll be hosting a half-day virtual summit featuring many of the panels and issues that were to have been presented in Pittsburgh. Registration is open, and I hope that you will be able to join us and participate in this great event. As of right now, we are moving forward with our international conference in Denver, August 2nd to 5th. We, of course, will be continuing to monitor the current situation and make any necessary changes to the program. Nominations for the ACT National Awards, which are presented at the conference, are currently open. So if you have a great program that you want to be recognized, I encourage you to nominate it. A link to the nomination form is on our website at actweb.org. Lastly, as you may be aware, Congress is currently working on economic stimulus packages aimed at helping individuals and organizations make it through these challenging times. ACT was provided an opportunity to give its input into these efforts, and we submitted a list of ideas on how to help commuters and ensure that sustainable transportation options like public transit, carpooling, vanpooling, biking, walking, and telecommuting remain viable during and after this crisis. You can also learn more about our request on our website. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's webinar, Blockchain and Transportation, Protection, Privacy, and Payments. Most have heard the term blockchain, but few of us understand what it means and how it may impact or benefit the work that we do. This webinar will present how blockchain technology may revolutionize transportation and dramatically change the transportation industry. Specifically, it will describe how blockchain works and identify the revolutionary implications of this technology. Our presenters will discuss the current limitations of the technology and the challenges that need to be overcome to realize its full potential. We hope that this webinar will provide a good introduction to the topic and provide an overview of where we are today and what are some of the major ongoing blockchain initiatives in the transportation sector. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Ian Todres, who is Vice President at ERG, a Massachusetts-based national consulting firm where he oversees voluntary program outreach, marketing, and climate-related projects for ERG's transportation practice. Serving several state, local, nonprofit agencies, TRB, EPA, and DOT, he has developed hundreds of outreach materials, technical reports, websites, and training materials for transportation policymakers, program managers, and fleet operators. He also has facilitated meetings of executives, senior researchers, and municipal transportation leaders to find consensus and set priorities for regional planning, coordinated communications, and climate change action. Ian has a long-standing commitment to TDM and ACT. He has helped ACT create engaging events at chapter and national conferences and is a graduate of ACT's Leadership Academy. In addition, he's presented at ACT National Clean Air Conferences and many regional and local transportation and TDM gatherings. He's a member of the Boston Blockchain Association and leads an initiative to introduce the technology and its applications to inner-city youth. At the National Academy of Sciences Transportation Research Board, Ian is principal investigator of a research contract to convene international thought leaders to exchange ideas on blockchain and its applications to airports. And then we'll be followed with Victoria Adams. Dr. Victoria Adams has more than 30 years experience in the technology industry. She's worked for most of the major technology and consulting firms and has supported governments around government around the work in technology and transportation policy. She's passionate about all things blockchain. She created and led Consensus, the largest pure play Ethereum blockchain firm in the world, U.S. Public Sector Group, and is a recognized thought leader on blockchain, GovTech, and FinTech, who has been interviewed by numerous publications, including Washington Post, Cointelegraph. She has spoken at more than 100 U.S. and international conferences, including Davos, and meetings on blockchain and the public sector, and is the author of numerous articles and think pieces on blockchain. She's currently advising several blockchain startups and foundations and has founded her own blockchain advisor firm and investment fund, Cadwin Block. Let's now introduce and turn it over to Ian Todres.
Hi, everybody. David, thank you for that introduction. I am beaming into you from this tiny little home office in my house in Greater Boston. As you can see, my wife has squirreled me into the back room of our house. And I guess our decoration needs a little bit of a refresh for this century. But my job here is really, I want to keep my remarks brief because we have a great presenter in Tori who's going to be talking to you this afternoon. But I just wanted to say that I'm here because I am bridging two topics and two worlds that I care a whole lot about. One is TDM and ACT, and the other is blockchain. I've been working on TDM and aware of TDM solutions since the early 2000s. And with that interest of mine. I got involved in ACT very early on. And a couple of years ago, I had the good fortune to win a contract with the National Academy's Transportation Research Board on looking at airport applications, blockchain applications for airports. And in the back of my mind, as I've continued my involvement with ACT through the trustees of the certification program and thinking about transportation solutions, I've really been struck by the power and potential of blockchain. And I feel that while TRB is doing a good job looking at blockchain technologies for airports, there is a parallel opportunity for the TDM community to look at blockchain applications in TDM. So with my TRB project, and I have been partnering with Tori Adams on that project for the past 2 years, and we'll be working together for probably another 2. I'm really, really excited to bring her to the ACT community and the TDM world in general to talk about blockchain and where it might make sense, where it may not make sense, and all help us get a better understanding for this technology. There are no stupid questions when it comes to blockchain. It's not a straightforward concept to grasp necessarily, and it can be intimidating hearing all these different terminologies and acronyms, but I'm sure that after today you'll have at least a basic understanding of what blockchain is, and I encourage you to follow up and ask a lot of questions as they come to mind, either after this presentation or beyond. I'm really interested in connecting with people in the TDM community, in the ACT community, who have a shared interest in TDM and blockchain. So without further ado, I would like to present the one and only Tori Adams.
Hi there. Ian might have shown his wealth with his palatial surroundings, but as you can see, my excess of toilet paper in these sad times makes me truly wealthy. So great introduction from David and Ian. Thank you very much. And thank you, Casey, for hosting this. And I'm going to jump straight in to the deck. So here we go. Share. And I just want to confirm, Casey, can you give me a thumbs up?
You're good. Go ahead. You can put in presenter mode.
Okay, it's coming up. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about blockchain and transportation. And specifically what we're going to do is describe the concept of blockchain, discuss the application of blockchain to transportation, and then describe a series of use cases. So I'll go through this pretty quickly because we've got a lot to cover, but I hope that I can answer some of your main questions as we go through. So let's first talk about what blockchain is. At its simplest, blockchain is a web technology that allows trustless exchange of data within a secure environment. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, the best way to understand blockchain is to compare blockchain to the traditional exchange model. Now, this model's been going on for about 5,000 years, ever since long-distance trade began. And in this model, any transaction or value exchange, and by that I mean any exchange of anything of value, money, security, access rights, data access, ownership, anything that is of value that needs to be transferred, must go through a middleman or intermediary if the parties do not know or trust one another. So for instance, if I was to buy a bicycle off Ian, I've known Ian for a few years, we get on pretty well, I would give him the money and say, bring the bike around when you have a chance. Now, that is implying there that I trust Ian and I know Ian. But if I'm buying a bike on the web, say on eBay or through Craigslist, I really want an intermediary, somebody that's going to hold the money until I get that bike. And that is typically a bank or some escrow service or something like that. Now, what's wrong with that? As I say, it's been going on about 5,000 years. Well, There's cost and time involved in processing. Anytime you have a middleman or an intermediary in any transaction of value, there is going to be a payment that the middleman requires, and time is going to be involved. Also, because I have a ledger that records my transactions, the merchant has a ledger who I'm buying from, and the bank has a ledger, inevitably those ledgers are going to go out of sync. We're going to put the wrong date, we're going to put the wrong time, something's going to happen. And when that happens, there's going to be cost and time to reconcile. Furthermore, in this age of electronic commerce, excuse me, I have allergies. I'm not dying over here, so if my voice goes, it's a bit like that. In this time of electronic commerce, the middleman, the intermediary who holds the ultimate record, they have created a honeypot for themselves. And that means they are the target for fraudsters and hackers. When you have these centralized systems, which we pretty much live in nowadays, there is always one party that holds the data access right. Be that Facebook, be that a bank, or be that some central managing authority for, say, a traffic system. When you have that single honeypot, that is a single point of failure, and that is where the hackers go. Now, the other thing is, of course, if people don't trust the intermediary or the middleman, the whole system breaks down. This is why we have problems with electronic health records. A lot of people don't trust the parties who would hold their records, and so we don't get easy flow of information. And it's very difficult for this system to work when we're talking about systems that require very near instantaneous communication. And finally, as it's become clear to us over the last couple of years, middlemen and monopolists can end up owning all of this data. And when they own this data, that can be a privacy concern. So this is a great system, but it has its faults. And blockchain was developed as an online electronic system to get around these. So let's talk about how blockchain works. So blockchain is a technology that allows for trustless exchange of value. Now, what do I mean by trustless? I mean, I don't know or necessarily trust the person I am transacting with. So how does blockchain work? Well, first, blockchain is made up of a number of computers called nodes that work together in a decentralized network. And by decentralized, I mean that no single party has control over the entire network. When a transaction occurs, in the example you see here between this person and a merchant, they are generating a particular puzzle, a mathematical puzzle that is going out. They are protecting themselves using double key public-private encryption, and they're hashing that information. And a hash is very important because that hash, I could take a three-letter message and I could take the King James Bible. And if I hashed them, you couldn't tell which was the three-letter and which was the King James Bible. They would look exactly the same. So I don't know the length or content of that. But when I develop that little mathematical puzzle that goes out, that's sent around that network. On all the nodes in the network are going to use this, these attempts to mathematically solve the problem that's generated. And when they solve it, they will come to a consensus as to whether this is a legitimate transaction. One of the nodes solves the problem and says, I think I have it, here's my solution. It's and they send it around the network, and the network then comes to a consensus. Now, I should add, this is just one way that you can verify transactions. There are all kinds of different ways of doing this. The type of transaction I'm describing here, or verification rather, is called proof of work. There are plenty more. I'm not going to complicate it by going through these. So this is just one way it's done. Now, as they reach consensus, that transaction then gets written into a block. into an electronic block saying this transaction occurred between this party and that party, identified only by their public key addresses. So no one knows what's going on in there. So that's very important. And once it's written into the block, it is tamper-proof. It cannot be changed. It is there all the time. Because the whole system is decentralized, you would have to hack every single node in the network and turn back that node. And that's just about impossible. No major blockchain has ever been hacked. They've been hacked when you start to get into the thing of getting hold of people's keys. But the network itself, when it is sufficiently centralized, requires so much computing power to be hacked that you just can't do it. And because every node processes the same transaction, all of the nodes have the same history. And a transaction can only be added by permission of all of those in the network. So you have this very secure system. I know it's a lot to think about. I know it's like a lot of questions there, but just think about that. I've got this decentralized system that is using various methods to validate it, and that very decentralization makes it secure. Now let's look at a few other concepts. Smart contracts. Smart contracts, a big name, simple idea. I can put into my blockchain a smart contract, which is essentially a business rule. If this, then that. And that's pretty powerful because they can be, I will give you $100 if it's Tuesday and LIBOR is less than X, unless a stock has been traded on previous Wednesday. They can be very complicated rules. Now that allows me to disintermediate all kinds of people. For instance, I could say, give $100 to my first grandchild on their 18th birthday. Now, I don't have grandchildren. My daughters are lazy. They haven't done what they were promised to do. So what I can do in my smart contract, though, is I can specify the account from which the money will be taken, what would constitute proof of birth, and then it would start a clock. And on their 18th birthday, send an email to an address I specified with instructions of how to take that money out of the bank. And I've just disintermediated the legal industry. Made a will for myself there. Now, those smart contracts can be very powerful indeed. The other thing I can do is create a native token, a coin on the blockchain that can be traded. So there's, for instance, a coin called Tether. Tether is pegged to the US dollar. It's what we call a stable coin. And that token can be traded. I can pay you in Tethers. Very familiar form of this is a currency token like Bitcoin, which is an electronic form of money. It was the first major implementation of blockchain. I should say, Bitcoin is not blockchain. Bitcoin is an implementation of the technology of blockchain. And furthermore, there is not a blockchain. There are many, many blockchains, just as there is not an internet. It is really multiple implementations of a technology that are connected together. Those coins can be currency, as I've just said. They can be investment, a fiat or collateralized stable coin. So I can say this coin is equivalent to so many tons of steel. This coin is equivalent to a particular financial instrument. Or it can be utility coin. I could say this coin can be used to raise money to build electric charging stations or a bike sharing program. Whoops, I'm sorry, I went back by accident there. A bike sharing program, and you can use this coin then to rent a bike. You would burn the coin in the parlance of it. So we've seen we've got this decentralized network that's very hacker-proof, that cuts out middlemen, that you can put smart contracts into, and you can put currency or tokens on board that can be used to do a number of things ranging from purchasing things to investments. Now, the last big element we've got is the difference between public and private. Now, public blockchains, there's also a distinction, well, I will mention that, public blockchains, and these definitions are varying a lot. There's a lot of dynamism going on in the space. So a public chain, anyone can get on the chain and start to become a validator. And also anyone can validate, can make a transaction on it. Ethereum is an example of this. Bitcoin is an example of this. So you have the chain is open. Sometimes we refer to it as the main net, especially when we talk about Ethereum. Ethereum is a kind of blockchain that has smart contracts in it that you can go on and start to use to create all kinds of interesting things. We could talk about permissioned and permissionless, but I think that's going. A permission blockchain is anyone can validate, a permissionless is anyone can validate. A permission is only someone can validate. But a public basically is like the web. A private is like an intranet. A company might run a private blockchain. For instance, World Wildlife Federation worked with fishermen in Fiji to create a private blockchain that allowed you to track tuna caught off the coast of Fiji to your plate. And each thing could be tracked in a tamper-proof system. So it's private. Only approved parties can join it. Only approved parties can transact on it. Only approved parties can verify it. And there's finally hybrid chains. And what hybrid chains are a sort of mixture of these two. They're changing a lot right now, how we mean this term. Sometimes they can mean only certain people can process transactions and validate them, but anybody can transact on. Or what we're starting to see more is how is that private chains can then use the main net, can use a public chain to transact with one another. So it might be Chase Manhattan uses their private chain that then uses a public chain that goes to Citibank. So you can start to see how this comes together. Public, private, permissionless. Smart contracts, tokens, tamper-proof. Why is this revolutionary? Well, think about it. It can protect individual privacy and data rights. I can share my information, but only share it to the people who want to know. I can produce things that validate my identity, but don't give it away. Think of the example of the bouncer and the young woman going to a club. She shows her ID to get in the club. Currently, that ID shows your address, your gender, your height, your weight, your eye color, all kinds of things. The bouncer only needs to know one thing, which is that person over 21? Blockchain could create an ID system the way you have verifiers coming in saying, yes, that person is over 21, and that would be the only thing that was presented. Well, why is that important? Well, normally in the bouncer and the young woman going to the club, it's no deal, unless that bouncer happens to be a stalker, and now they've got some information. But in a blockchain world, we could control who gets the information via smart contract. We can create secure tamper-proof records. We can disintermediate services and digital processes. Think of all the steps that you have to go through to buy stocks, to purchase a house, to look at a record. We can squeeze all that come out. We can unlock excess capacity of physical assets. If I've got a vehicle, now I can join my vehicle, say, to a car sharing process, and I can keep track of everything that's going on, know who used, when used, all of those kind of things. And that will allow me to create liquid, transparent markets where I can see everything that's happened and reduce and eliminate transaction costs. Now, with that accountable record, because in the block, remember, every transaction is laid out. And if I put in my smart contract, certain auditors or certain regulators can open it up. I can reduce fraud and theft. There is no more evidence, there is no more time, say, in a poor country with underdeveloped land records, where somebody can turn up at a farmer's gate and say, I have the title to your house, in this case, because they bribed the mayor of the town, because if I had a blockchain record, it would be in the blockchain and tamper-proof. So that's a big thing. I can demonstrate regulatory compliance by my auditable record that's in the chain that can't be tampered with. And I can create incentives via tokenization. I can say, if you do this, then I will give you so many tokens. That can be a powerful thing. And I can accelerate payment and reduce contract disputes. All of that time and money and energy that is spent doing things like figuring out if this transaction really occurred, all of that can disappear. Now, we've gone through that at a huge gallop, and I know later on you'll have lots of questions. It took me a long time to get this, so if you're feeling like I'm not quite sure, that's cool, but there's a lot here. So let's go on. So let's look at some transportation use cases and how this might work within the space we're talking about. Now, this table is a bit of an eye chart, and I'm not going to go through everything here, because if we went through everything, we'd spend the rest of the day, and I just want to narrow in on a few. But think of just a few of these. Integrated ticketing for trip gain, multiple service providers. I can get everybody to join a consortium chain where we all work with that chain, and we can transfer value, the ticketing, the rides that are there, and the payments through, and cut out all of those middlemen. That's pretty incredible. You know, just jumping down, we can set up bike-to-buy programs for economically disadvantaged persons, where using a bike would start to generate tokens. So we're getting people to use bikes, which is healthy and all the rest of it. And those disadvantaged persons would gain tokens, which they could use to purchase or maintain their own bike finally. We could exchange data between vehicles in real time. That would allow us to do all kinds of interesting things when it comes to the connected vehicle and the connected car world. So you'll see this deck as we send out, and you can look at some of these and research them. But I want to just sort of narrow down onto a couple of these use cases and talk. By the way, if you hear meows in the background, that is one of my very fat old ginger cats who is always trying to hog the microphone. So let's think about applying this vision to mobility as a service. Now, we all know what that is, you know, shift away from personally owned systems of transportation to providing it as a service where we combine all kinds of different systems. And on the right of the screen there, you're seeing the vision, all modes connected into a single ecosystem. So whether I'm using a tram or an electric scooter or a ride share or a taxi or whatever, these communicate into an API, application processing initiated layer, and then into a device layer that the customer can use. So I can move easily from my bus to my bike to the rideshare. Payment, ticketing, everything is integrated. I move across the urban space in a frictionless way. That's the vision. What's the reality right now? The reality is, as we see here, that we have a number of different modes that are in silos. We have them with their asset data, with their client data, with their trip data, with their payment data, going down into multiple ways to pay. And there is enormous difficulty in getting these parties to share the data. They might have competitive concerns. There might be two rideshare companies that are going. The bus company might be competing with the bike company. The scooter company might be competing with other scooter companies and with the car company. We see all of these things that make it very difficult to share data and to share payment data and to share payment types, such that the wonderful vision of mobility as a service is turned into this siloed, clunky system where we can't share data. We see inefficiency and duplication, overuse of some assets and underuse of others, social inequities in the sense that I can't get a rideshare in a certain part of the city that has a bad reputation, but I've got dozens of rideshares around somewhere else. All of this is created by the structure, the architecture of a system where we have these siloed systems. Now, how can blockchain help this? Well, imagine if all of these entities were on a single blockchain, a consortium blockchain, possibly a hybrid. They would all have their own nodes on the system and other nodes that would be out there to validate and verify. They would be able to take perhaps a token that is purchased by a user who would be converting their fiat currency, the currency we walk around in our pocket, into these tokens, which could interchangeably be used to pay for all of these entities here. Furthermore, these guys could share their data. Now, they don't necessarily need to share all of it. They would just need to share something that would allow the system to function. So they could keep their special sauce, their algorithms that allow them to put their bikes in the right place and all of this. But they would just share enough data. And if you look down the bottom where I have that little columnated building there down at the 6 o'clock point on that, they could be sharing even more data with government, which would allow government to plan. Now, within that single tokenized system, they could be easily sharing payment. You just need one thing that would be translated into that token, and then that token would be used by any of these parties who could then turn it back into actual money. They would be sharing their data as needed, as they felt comfortable doing within a single system. They would be sharing information on how things connect and timetables and all of that. Smart contracts could manage the interactions between each entity. And regulators, for instance, could observe rideshare by being able, using the terms of the smart contract, to open certain transactions. Coordination and access could be managed in a low-cost way because we wouldn't have to have a big centralized control here. The decentralization of the system would allow each party to work, and we'd create automated, we would automate audit trails that would allow us to go back and look at that. So a regulator can go back and look at execution of procurement orders, of legal contracts, of tickets, of receipts, all of these things managed. We would create this frictionless way of moving across the urban space. Now, there's a lot of things we need to work out in this. Getting all these parties together is a deal in itself, I can tell you, because I've tried to do this with a number of ones, and that is a hard thing to do. There are certain things about processing transactions. Still, the technology has a problem when it comes to scaling up, and there are certain solutions to that. Various folks have interesting solutions. You know, a firm called Block One has a unique kind of way of validating that can speed things up. A firm called Consensus is working to be able to process things faster on the Ethereum chain. IBM has developed a very sophisticated system in IBM Fabric to deal with some of the transaction issues and the scale issues. But there's something there, and you're starting to see this work out. Madrid, I believe, has tried to move towards this system of a single payment system. I don't think they're using a token, but they're moving this. We're seeing a lot of play in Europe around this. So it's there. It's definitely something that's starting to move. In the city of Zug, the canton in Switzerland, they use an Ethereum system which links all of the city services around a single blockchain-based identity for a citizen. The citizen owns their data. The citizen is then able to access anything of the city's buses, the city's bikes, its scooters, and to get around in that single mobility place. And they're expanding it more to the entire canton, the state, and they'll be able to use the Swiss railways in that case. So we're starting to see examples of this. So this is a real thing that can happen, and we are seeing implementations of it. But as we go into the future, we can imagine some more. This is an example that some folks have suggested. Now, imagine in this example here on the screen, we have a highway leading into a town, and that has some sort of traffic control on it saying you can only have 1,000 cars going in. And currently 1,200 vehicles want to go down this highway. Now, one thing I could do with blockchain, if I'd registered all these vehicles, or if individuals had registered their vehicle on a smartphone app that was then linked up to a blockchain, is I could do an auction. I could use a tokenized currency, I could put my money in, and I could then auction off who gets a place. And I could do this because it would be quite cheap to do, because I wouldn't have to have a central authority. I can have the network immediately match and pull things together. And we have seen examples of this kind of auctioning, not for vehicles, but we've definitely seen this when we come to purchasing assets where this auctioning is happening in real time. If car A, for instance, had won a place from some allocation of one of those 1,000 slots, they could auction off their slot. And in this example, we see A, B, C, and D bid for A's place. And D finally wins the auction. So D takes A's place. So A has some value. Say this is the day when everybody with an odd number at the end of their license plate gets to go. And A was that car. They auction their place off to D. They get paid in tokens. The smart contract manages everything. And A has made some value. This is also interesting because you can see how you can use it to create both incentives and also to create assets out of things that previously weren't, in this case, a position in traffic. Now, I could also self-police this, because if I had some sort of sensor or device coming in, I could know if A violated it, it could immediately be taken away or fined as a violation of the contract, and A would have to pay something. Pretty fancy idea. You're starting to see some folks look into this. So that's where I'd like to end today, and I know I went through that very quickly. I can tell you the blockchain is seeing dramatic uptake. We're seeing it mainly in enterprises now. We're seeing a lot of folks coming in and doing things ranging from trade finance support to supply chain tracking. We're seeing things from monetizing digital figures that you can play in video games and then and betting on them. All kinds of stuff coming down. You wouldn't believe the application. So I'll end there and we should go to question time.
Thank you very much, Tori. That was a great introduction, I think, for a lot of our folks. Okay. Those of you who have any questions, please go ahead and type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we'll go ahead and get started here. We got a few questions to ask you here, Tori. Let me just pull it up here. Okay. First one. What organizations or entities need to come together to advance blockchain adoption?
So I'll address just the transportation area. So the transportation tends to be locally organized. So those folks who are out there within that space, local governments need to become more and more active in this, and local transportation authorities, and really carrying the can there. We're seeing a great deal of adoption in the enterprise space, specifically within private enterprises. Public enterprises within the United States are lagging behind, but we're definitely seeing that. So it's got to start out really with somebody in a community who's interested in it, who wants to move this forward. For instance, in Berkeley in California, they're putting out a mini Muni bond on the blockchain. So the bond would be released onto the blockchain, and it would be priced such that anybody can buy it, you know, like $50 or something like that, rather than the $6,000 or so you need to get in to buy a bond nowadays. So it's really, we find it's best when it starts from the community up.
Okay. And Ian, don't forget, you can chime in whenever you need to. This next question, what is the role for traditional transportation planning organizations like MPOs and DOTs? What kind of role do they play?
We haven't seen a lot of this in the States, so I really, don't know. But again, get educated, learn what you can do, and then start to see if you can run particular pilots. What we're seeing is the pattern for public organizations getting involved here is two things. One, acting as a catalyst to try and bring people together to start talking to that. Normally it's some established blockchain firm or entrepreneurial blockchain firm, and then an entity like a MPO coming together and getting and creating that organization to begin to pull this together. So I think it's acting as a convener, and it's acting as an educator and visionary.
Can I chime in there too?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in the Boston area, the Boston Blockchain Association is constantly talking about the importance of developing a blockchain ecosystem in this city, in the state, in New England, et cetera. And they talk about the importance of having the involvement of many players from across all sectors. So as Tori said, you need government officials there, but we also need lawyers, we need entrepreneurs. There's a role for universities who are willing to, train people in an academic setting, technologists, and so forth, because there isn't really one entity, is my understanding, that can just simply launch a blockchain. You'll have a startup that will have a service, but then they're going to need help communicating with their customers and other stakeholders to tie it in and integrate it into the way business is currently done. So to my response to the person asking the question of the role of an MPO would be, you need to plug into the local or regional effort to build a blockchain ecosystem in your geographic area. And then what you bring to the table, your relationships, your mission, and your expertise will sort of organically link to the people that need that and help foster more blockchain applications.
Okay. Ian, real quickly, before I get into the next question, someone had just chimed in asking that they didn't know that Boston has a blockchain association, that they hadn't really Googled it yet. But do you know if those are common throughout the U.S. to have, citywide associations for it?
I believe they are. Tori, there's one in the greater DC area, right?
Yeah, pretty much every major city will have something.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. All right, the next question. Tori, how do you overcome the issue of trust, cost, transparency, and redundancy so that organizations are willing to give this a try?
Sure. So this is a pretty wild idea. And in particular, we're talking about something which suggests a paradox, that the more you give up control, the more you give up security, it seems, by sharing, the greater security you gain. And that's a counterintuitive notion to a lot of people. So there has to be a lot of education, and there has to be a lot of examples and visualization that you can identify with and sort of really get your hand around.
Mm-hmm.
Ian and a colleague of his have been working on simple games to try and get people to understand this. A colleague of mine and I, we've been working on things with Legos to try and get people to understand. But I think one of the things that's important is with any new technology, you're being asked to understand more than you need to. When the web first came out, it was very counterintuitive to try and understand that the web was everywhere and nowhere. That somehow if you typed an address in, somebody on the other side of the world knew exactly what you were looking for and can give it you. But it happened. And getting over that lump where you're at the beginning, where you're being asked to try and trust this when it isn't being trusted, when it doesn't seem like it should work, it's a big lump. I find that there are these games that can help, there are education that can help, there is digging down into the technology to understand why it works.
Mm-hmm.
But often the best example is to run some sort of small scale pilot, something that is useful, and see if it works. Because what sells things in the end, what sold the web in the end, was not that, you've got this TCP protocol that connects you via a web address and so on, but it was just so damn useful when you got onto it.
Mm-hmm.
And you started to say, okay, I get it. So I think running those pilots are the things that get you going, seeing it work, seeing how it can take a fish caught in Fiji and you can track that tuna from the moment it came in to when it lands on your plate and see everything in the supply chain. That's a powerful thing. And know that it wasn't tampered with.
I'd also like to add, Tori, that another thing about blockchain is that, like the internet, you don't necessarily need to know what's going on behind the curtain in order to appreciate the benefits and to use it. So, if you think about electricity, all we really need to do is know that when we flip the switch, the lights go on. We don't really need to know how the circuits are created and where the wires go, et cetera.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
for blockchain. So it's really neat to see a blockchain application on your smartphone because it looks and acts like every single other app.
Yeah, I have an application on my smartphone that pays me tokens for steps I take.
Well,
And
there
then
you
I
go.
can take those steps and trade that for various things of parties who have come on to that web application to sell me stuff, essentially. But you know, hey, it works.
Yeah, great example. Okay, we have a few more questions here. Someone asked, are there other examples like Muni where the transportation sector is already starting or using blockchain? Is there still so fuzzy? It's still so fuzzy to me, and more examples will help me understand it better.
Sure. So we are seeing some examples in the car industry and around vehicles. We are seeing less things in the sort of transportation demand area. So we're starting to see things like payment systems where you can move between different scooter companies or a scooter company and a bus system, where they're taking out a lot of the intermediaries that are involved there. We're seeing things like, as I say, the city of Zug. So Zug is this place in Switzerland that has a very silly name. And what they can do there is you have your citizen identity on your phone and you control your data there. And all it's saying is, when you look at it, you are a citizen of Zug. It's been validated by people and it offers you certain rights. So you can go up to a bike share and you can put it in. It reads the QR code that goes onto the blockchain. You've taken this bike and you can go off. People from outside Zug have to pay to use the bikes. So you can get those kind of things. Now, if you would like, I can just play out that Muni example to give you a better example. Would that be okay if I did that?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to share this as an example of something that might help this. And it's going back in a little bit more detail to what I wanted. So let's assume here that we have a city that it's showing a picture of a road, but let's assume it's those electrical charging stations. Now, I want to be able to show to people that I'm going to purchase, that we're going to have these electrical charging stations, but what's going to happen when we go through there is that everybody is going to benefit from this. So how do I do it? So I issue some tokens on the blockchain and I put them out for what is called an initial community offering. So an ICO. And I sell these tokens at a discount. And I sell them to anybody in the town or anybody that wants to buy it, maybe some electric car companies. And I say these tokens are going to be utility tokens. So you're going to be able to burn them when you use that charging station. Now, there's been a lot of opposition to these charging stations. So I'm going to actually give everybody in the community a token. So I'm going to take, say, 20% of those tokens and give them to every householder, every property owner and renter within my community. I'm just going to give them 2 tokens each, say. And I'm going to take, and the other ones I'm going to sell. And I'm going to sell them at a discount. So say normally the token would buy you 10 charges. Well, I'm going to say it's going to buy you 20 charges. So I get the money up front to be able to build these charging stations. And I've also created a secondary market, because now everybody that doesn't have an electric vehicle, and I've created an incentive to use those electric vehicles, can now sell the tokens. Now, they're going to benefit from it. So I've also dealt with a little bit of opposition. Furthermore, I'm going to do this so everybody can see me building it. Every invoice that's been built, every work order coming in there. So there's going to be no corruption, no tampering of it. All the records, all the procurement, everything will go on there. And I can even see data on the charging stations. I can know who's charging and when they're charging. That can be pretty impressive. So I'll be able to use this to fund infrastructure improvements, to create support within the community for the project, and then also to take that and be able to track the usage of my new electric stations and seeing if this experiment is working. So you can see that this is a very facile technology. It can be very flexible in how it's coming around. Very, very simple to understand when you think about its benefits.
Okay, thank you.
I will stop share.
Appreciate it. Okay. Moving on to the next question here, and I'll pull this back up here on the screen. If transportation partnerships around the country create their own blockchain ecosystems for local transportation partners, would they be able to be stitched together, or would someone else have to lead the creation of a nationwide ecosystem? Do you know anything about the work of the Mobility on Demand Alliance or ITS America, and are they working on this?
I believe that they have had various working groups on this. I don't know the details, but I believe that they have. However, what you could do, going back to those hybrid chains, is what I could have is a series of private chains that would develop, say, for a particular city. So Boston could develop its all, and then it wanted to connect up with another nearby city. What it could do then is connect via the mainnet to that other city that's out there. So I could gradually start to stitch these things together. Now, it would bring in more agreements. One would have to agree on a single token or payment system, but it would be something that you could start to do. And even if you had different tokens, you could begin to write the exchange value in smart contracts. So what I would be doing then is I would have my my transactions on my private chain for one city, and then I would have my transactions on my second city. They would interact via the mainnet. So certain information they would copy over into the mainnet, and the mainnet would validate it using its processes, and then it would share that data between them as specified by the smart contracts. And then the token exchange rate could be established. So say, I don't know, city A's tokens would be worth 0.5 of city B's tokens, or something like that, or would be worth the same amount if you move to it. Again, it's forming these consortia and gradually building. We're starting to see in the health space and in the education space, the consortiums in one part, once they're set up, they find it easy to work with consortiums set up in another part. So we've seen in education, some universities are using this to validate qualifications. Big problem, faked qualifications. How do I really get it? When one tries and gets one's educational records, it's a giant pain in the ass. Imagine if you had your education identity going on there on your phone. You could validate it, say this is what it is. Now I want to see if somebody moves from the Dallas school system to the Raleigh school system. I want to be able to communicate with them. It's so much easier if they both establish their own blockchain, and then they can communicate information and maintain the regulatory requirements that are there. And you're seeing that in the health space.
Interesting. Okay, great.
Yeah, like FDA was creating a system for which turns out to be quite prescient for emergency communication within an epidemic, where they would be able to move data around a number of different hospitals and be able to track that it followed all requirements when it came to regulations about sharing patient data, and that the appropriate person saw it. And once they set up a number of hospitals, they could expand it easily to other systems.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we can get one more question in here real quickly. The smart contract is interesting, but contract approval cycles can be daunting. What suggestions do you have for getting the parties to participate in a smart contract?
So to begin with, you shouldn't think of a smart contract as a legal contract. It's essentially just a set of business rules. If this, then that. Now they can get very complicated. I'd look at a product called Open Law, which allows you to write legal contract law directly into the blockchain, directly into an Ethereum blockchain. Very impressive. You can put legal language and it turns it into computer language. I sometimes say that's just going to lead to bad code and bad law. But, lawyers are going to write bad computer code and computer people are going to write bad law. But which opens up the whole thing of you got to audit these smart contracts because you don't know what you're committing yourself to. And once it's in the blockchain, it's in the blockchain. If you've mistakenly said, I give you $1 million, you've given someone $1 million. There's no way to get it back. So you've got to make sure that they're right. Now, when you're pulling that through, you've got to have folks who are initially familiar with the entire blockchain process. They've got to understand the vital importance of these. There are lawyers, there are audit firms that are specializing now in writing these smart contracts. And they cannot take the place of legal contracts. They can only reflect a legal contract or a process that you have already agreed to. And you got to get that consensus around it and then translate it into that. It will not substitute for all the legal wrangling and argument. It will just automate it once it is agreed to.
Okay. Very good.
Can I?
Yes, go right ahead, Ian.
I just have like 1 or 2 closing remarks. I don't know if we're there yet.
Yeah, we're just almost about to hit the top of the hour. So yes, go right ahead.
I was going to say that if anyone can access LinkedIn Learning, there are a couple of short courses on like Blockchain 101, Blockchain Basics that I've taken and I recommend, and they're very easy to find on LinkedIn Learning. And also Consensus offers a online course that is also really good in providing the basics of blockchain for business people. And it's very, it's a little more in depth. I think it's an 8-hour course or something like that.
And an outfit called Value Technology, which is a private foundation in DC. They're going to start putting out a blockchain for transportation course in the next 3 months.
And then if there are people who are interested in the topic, and as you can easily see, there is still a lot of work to be done in the topic of transportation and applying blockchain applications there. And maybe there's an opportunity for the Transportation Research Board to fund some research on blockchain applications for TDM specifically. And I know that ACT has groups that work on TRB committees and so forth. So it would be a really interesting connection to make on that part.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we've just hit over the top of the hour here, and I just want to take a moment and thank you both again for bringing this topic to the forefront for our members here. Tori, it was a wonderful presentation, and thank you very much. I want to thank all of our listeners this afternoon. We really appreciate it, you joining us for this webinar. And once again, it is being recorded and will be online within 24 hours as we conclude here. And please join us in April. Looking at April 19th for our next ACT National webinar. Thank you both again, and I hope you all have a great staying healthy day here. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.